welcome to A News. My name's Katie Wilson. Here's the top stories making the headlines today. Israel rejects the US peace plan for Gaza, demanding that Hamas disarms first. Russia and Ukraine exchange a wave of strikes as both sides report casualties. And Kazakhstan seeks new oil export routes through Azerbaijan as pipelines disruptions raise security concerns. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. First, Israel has formally rejected a US-backed roadmap for Gaza. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu insists that Israeli forces will not withdraw until Hamas no longer poses a threat.
Israeli forces will not withdraw from Gaza until Hamas is fully disarmed. That's what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said at a cabinet meeting on Sunday. It marks Israel's first official rejection of US President Donald Trump's 15-point plan. He said Israeli forces would continue carrying out attacks in Gaza to thwart threats. Netanyahu said Tel Aviv is still discussing the document with the United States, with some proposals acceptable to Israel and others not.
Israel rejects the 15-point plan. I heard that there were those who said, "You didn't say it." But we did say it, and here, I am saying it again. Israel rejects 15-point plan. The IDF will not carry out any withdrawal until the dismantling of Hamas and its weapons. And when I say dismantling Hamas and its weapons, that means heavy weaponry, less heavy weaponry, and smaller arms. All weaponry.
The plan was drafted in May by Nikolay Mladenov, the High Representative for Gaza of the US-led Board of Peace. President Trump formally announced that the board had reached an agreement on the complete disarmament of Hamas and other armed groups back in July. Hamas said a day later that it had accepted the latest version of the roadmap for the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire, but it conditioned weapons arrangements on a complete halt to what it called aggression, an Israeli withdrawal and progress on reconstruction. The ceasefire took effect in last October. Since then, Gaza-based health authorities say Israeli attacks have killed more than 1,250 people and injured more than 4,100 others.
Well, Hamas has been giving its reaction to Netanyahu's announcement, saying it remains committed to the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire. The group is calling on mediators to set a clear timeline for its implementation. Hamas wants an end to hostilities, a full Israeli withdrawal, the opening of crossings, and the entry of aid and shelter supplies. It also called for reconstruction to begin and for a national committee to carry out its tasks. Meanwhile, 7 Palestinians have been injured by Israeli fire across Gaza, according to medical sources. Shelling and gunfire has been reported in several areas. 6 of those were taken to Nasser Hospital after Khan Yunis was hit, while another was injured in Gaza City. Israeli forces also reportedly fired on homes and tents sheltering displaced Palestinians. Meanwhile, more than 20,000 approved patients are reportedly trapped behind strict border closures. Patients at the Al-Shifa Medical Complex issued a global appeal for medical evacuation. Palestinians in Gaza City have been given their reaction to Netanyahu's announcement that Israeli forces will not withdraw.
Palestinians in Gaza City have expressed disappointment after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected US President Donald Trump's latest Gaza plan. Residents said they had hoped the proposal would bring an end to the conflict and ease months of killing, destruction, and displacement.
We were happy in the beginning that the war would stop for us. In general, it was excellent joy for the people of Gaza. Now, with Netanyahu's decision, it disappointed us honestly. We felt like we are going backwards.
For many, the continuing uncertainty has deepened concerns over how long the suffering in Gaza will continue.
We were surprised that he rejected the plan. We have no one but God to look for us. We want the war to end, for the suffering of Gaza to end. the killing, strikes, displacement. Every day there are assassinations. Every day there are injured and killed people. We want to live like the rest of people, live like the rest of the countries.
President appealed to those involved in the negotiations to consider the impact of repeated delays and disagreements on civilians. Hamas says it remains committed to the roadmap agreed with mediators in Cairo. But for residents in Gaza, the immediate concern remains an end to the conflict and the uncertainty surrounding their daily lives.
To some other news now, and Russia and Ukraine have exchanged another wave of overnight drone and missile attacks. In Russia's Belgorod region, at least 6 people were killed. In Ukraine's northern city of Sumy, at least 5 people were injured overnight, according to local authorities.
Russia and Ukraine have accused each other of launching large-scale overnight drone attacks, with casualties reported on both sides. At least 13 people, including a child, have been killed and 39 others injured in a Ukrainian drone attack on the Russian city of Nizhnekamsk, according to local authorities. The overnight strike targeted industrial and civilian sites in Tatarstan, around 800 kilometers east of Moscow, and reportedly damaged a major oil refinery. Russia's defense ministry said its forces intercepted and destroyed 456 Ukrainian drones over several regions, Russian-annexed Crimea and the Black Sea and Sea of Azov. Ukraine, meanwhile, said Russia launched 202 drones overnight, along with missile attacks on several regions. In the southern port city of Odessa, authorities said at least 14 people were injured and residential buildings were damaged. Ukraine's Air Force said 174 drones were intercepted or suppressed. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also reported strikes in several other regions, including Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Sumy and Zaporizhia.
Bulgaria's defence chief said on Sunday there was no evidence that the drone that entered the country's airspace had deliberately targeted Bulgaria. He said the unmanned aircraft may have been diverted by electronic warfare. It had entered the country from Romania and exploded close to the Trans-Balkan natural gas pipeline on Saturday. Initial analysis suggests it was a decoy drone widely used by Ukrainian forces, but Kyiv denies it targeted Bulgaria. However, Sofia has summoned Ukraine's ambassador for talks on the incident. Staying in the Balkans, President Zelensky made his first official visit to Serbia over the weekend, a European country still closely aligned with Moscow. Joining us now to discuss the implications of this visit is Stefan Antic, Senior Research Fellow at the Hungarian Institute for International Affairs. So thank you for joining us first of all. And how surprised are you that Zelensky chose to visit Serbia, a country still maintaining ties with Moscow?
First of all, thank you for having me. This is a surprise only to casual observers of the issue and people who have, over the years, given into the perception that Serbia is a direct ally of Moscow in any shape or form. Those analysts that predominantly emanate from the West tend to confuse popularity, which Russia undeniably enjoys among the Serbian people, with influence, which has been waning over, certainly over the past couple of years and certainly since 2022, but even more so, but even before that, in the period since President Vučić assumed power in 2012. This issue with Zelensky's visit has been coming for quite some time, and greatest hints of that we were able to see last month when the Southeast Europe Ukraine summit was held, and where Serbia was represented at the highest level. With the President Vučić obviously attending the meeting. The visit of the Ukrainian president was carefully choreographed because, as you can imagine, in a country where Russia is immensely popular, hosting a Ukrainian president during the conflict with Moscow is a vastly unpopular move, which is why this visit needed to be carefully choreographed, and why the president, for instance, the Serbian president, for instance, carefully picked and chose the timing of where he was going to appear with Zelensky, who was going to welcome him at the airport, which obviously, contrary to every protocol, wasn't him, but it was actually the Minister of Energy who welcomed him there. And the entire visit simply radiated with very, very careful messaging that was calibrated to signal certain things to Serbia's Western partners, that Serbia is on board with Western policy on Ukraine, and also to signal to the domestic public in Serbia that this is a matter of business, that this is not a matter of breaking ties with Moscow.
Very interesting that you outline the popularity of Russia compared to the popularity of Ukraine among the public. Why do you think in that case that Vučić chose to welcome Ukraine's president, and could it be to do with pursuing EU membership?
Well, I don't think that the EU membership issue is high on Vucic's agenda. There are many issues regarding this Serbia's EU path that we don't really have time to get into right now. Although perhaps we could revisit the issue at some other time. This is primarily about Serbia's Vucic's increasingly precarious position within Serbia and his ability to stay in power. Vucic has been in power for 14 years in a variety of roles, as prime minister, and then as president. And his second term is coming to an end, is due to be concluded in April of next year. In the meantime, he's been under increasing pressure to call for a snap parliamentary election, and he is severely threatened by the popularity of the student movement and the student list that is perceived already as a potential contender for power if the elections are to be held anytime soon. Just as a reminder, last year on March 15th, 2025, Serbia probably had its biggest protests since the introduction of the multi-party system in the early 1990s. And just for comparison, a country of 6.6, 6.7 million that it has right now was able to field about 300,000 people in a single day, which more than doubles the amount of people that took to the streets in October 2000 when Slobodan Milosevic was toppled. So in many ways, this prompts analysts to conclude that President Vucic is somewhat of a spent force politically. And surviving in power in Serbia has always been, at least since the country regained independence, a confluence of factors. You need to have popular support, obviously, to keep you in power, but you also need key political allies abroad, where who will be able to support you and to basically advertise you as a proponent of cooperation, as a proponent of cordial and orderly relations. Vucic has been struggling to find these partners within the European Union on which his survival in power rests to a great extent, ever since the departure of Angela Merkel, actually in 2021. He wasn't able to find such a partner in her either Olaf Scholz or Friedrich Merz. and he was to some extent successful in obtaining from French President Emmanuel Macron. Nevertheless, Macron is due to step down next year, and the visit of Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is a way, again, of showing that Vučić is fully on board with the policy that the European Union is pursuing with regards to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and that Serbia isn't a country that that is many times perceived to be as in other words, to put it in other words, a Russian ally.
Now, just quickly to finish off, Serbia is a country that hasn't pursued Western sanctions against Russia. So how significant is this visit from Zelensky's perspective?
Well, I think that President Zelensky is in many ways trying to acquire new partners everywhere around the world. And since the beginning of this war, obviously his main tasks have been to rally the support to mount any sort of defense against the Russian military. And the second thing that he's been pursuing was a public relations campaign that was aimed to portray Russia as a country that only a handful of less than reputable characters would support in this conflict, and even those who support it wouldn't do so very overtly. I think that from a public relations point of view, his trip to Serbia is meant to signal that even a country that's perceived as a Russian staunch ally in the Balkans is actually moving away from Russia and is sympathetic toward Ukraine. This will certainly resonate with the Ukrainian public, but will also signal key messages to the West, from which Zelensky draws much of his support for the war. The other thing that has been mentioned, although not sufficiently explored, recently had the article published by the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, which stated that Ukrainian officials and intelligence officers have been visiting different locations in Serbia where they wanted to build a drone factory that would be obviously used if the war prolongs for their operations against the Russian military. Vučić vehemently denied this during the press conference he held with Zelensky, but nevertheless, his statement is not perceived to be as sincere as he might have liked it to be.
All really interesting. Thank you so much for breaking this down for us and for joining us on the programme this afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Now, UK authorities have removed internet connectivity from surveillance drones used by the Royal Navy after discovering that components in their cameras were transmitting data to China. While the Ministry of Defence says no sensitive government data was compromised, the discovery has raised concerns over potential security risks and the sourcing of equipment used by the British military. The government is now facing calls to review defence equipment for possible vulnerabilities elsewhere. France's budget minister has appealed to candidates in next year's presidential election to not delay difficult decisions on public spending. David Amiel says repairing public finances is the #1 priority facing France.
France must not delay difficult decisions on public spending until after next year's presidential election. That is the warning from Budget Minister David Amiel, who says repairing the country's public finances is the government's top priority. Amiel is preparing France's 2027 budget, which is due to be presented to Parliament in the autumn. He has also called on candidates in next year's election to put forward credible spending plans rather than making expensive promises to voters. France's minority government, led by Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu, plans to increase defense spending and maintain funding for green initiatives next year. But the government has limited room to reduce the deficit. Weak economic growth, rising interest payments and higher military spending are putting further pressure on public finances. Unemployment also rose to 8.3% in the second quarter, its highest level in almost 6 years. The cost of servicing France's debt is also rising. The country paid 34.5 billion euros in interest during the first 6 months of this year, 18.8% more than during the same period in 2025. With the presidential election approaching, the government faces the challenge of reducing the deficit while maintaining spending on defense and other priorities.
After the break, Iran welcomes the trilateral security cooperation deal agreed with regional partners. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Iran has welcomed the trilateral security cooperation deal agreed by Pakistan, Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Tehran says it's a chance for regional countries to foster security ties without relying on outside powers. A News' correspondent Taras Shirarilu reports from the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman's weekly briefing.
Iran's foreign ministry said Tehran has always supported regional states' efforts to establish security based on mutual trust, following the signing of a trilateral security pact between Pakistan, Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Spokesman Ismail Baghai stressed that security is not a commodity to be purchased from what he termed extra-regional dealers. The Iranian official confirmed that Iran was informed of the provisions of the security pact before it was signed last week in Mecca. He said the agreement signaled the understanding among regional states that they can't rely on the United States and other countries for security, saying Washington is itself part of the security problem in the region. Asked about whether Iran has an interest to join the trilateral agreement, Baghai said Iran has been a pioneer in regional security arrangements. To a question on the Iran-Oman talks on the Strait of Hormuz and reopening of the waterway, the spokesman said that the negotiations are bilateral and between the two littoral states. The Iranian official said that experts are discussing the details of an agreement on shipping traffic, confirming that charging navigation service fees is one of the items on the agenda of discussions. He added that the maritime corridor was opened before the Israeli-US war against Iran, stressing that Iran is in the state of imposed war, and as long as the aggression continues, the strait will not reopen. According to Baghai, the US violated Clause 5 of the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding by escorting vessels from the waterway. The spokesman confirmed that Tehran and Washington are in contact through mediators, rejecting reports of any negotiations between Iran and the US. Taras Shirarilu from Iranian Foreign Ministry for A News.
Meanwhile, Turkey's foreign minister says the new pact is meant to deter conflict rather than provoke it. Hakan Fidan also suggested the bloc could eventually expand to include other regional countries if conditions allow. Adam Morrow has more from Istanbul.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has said a new defense pact between Turkey, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia was not aimed at any particular country, including Iran, describing the alliance as a, quote, defensive in nature. Speaking to Turkish state media, Fidan compared the Mecca Joint Defense Agreement to NATO's Article 5 Collective Defense Clause, under which an attack on one member is regarded as an attack on all. He said the agreement seeks to strengthen regional stability by improving cooperation among the three signatories, rather than creating an offensive military bloc. Fidan stressed that Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan are not pursuing expansionist policies, adding that the alliance has no dispute with any country unless one of its members comes under attack. He also said the agreement establishes a ministerial committee modeled on NATO's political and military structures, together with a permanent general secretariat to be based in Saudi Arabia. Fidan said Egypt could eventually join the alliance once certain technical issues were resolved, adding that the long-term objective is to expand the framework to include other regional partners. Turning to the South Caucasus, Fidan said a lasting peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan could eventually create the conditions for a broader regional security architecture. Once regional peace is achieved, he said, South Caucasus countries could develop institutional security arrangements similar to those now emerging in the Middle East, although he stressed that each region has different priorities. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
President Trump has indicated Washington will pursue economic pressure on Iran rather than new military strikes as the conflict in the Gulf continues. Trump says the two sides are only semi-negotiating, while Iran says no direct talks are taking place. Meanwhile, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps says it will keep control of the Strait of Hormuz until its demands are met, and claims the other side is now focused on reopening the waterway. Iran's parliament has also approved the main framework of a plan to strengthen security around the strategic strait. Meanwhile, Yemen's Houthi military group has carried out missile and drone strikes on the Red Sea port city of Mocha, killing at least 7 people. The Houthis say they were targeting Saudi troops in depots at the port. The strikes come after the group declared a naval blockade on Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea last month, citing what it called a Saudi siege. Riyadh denies the claim. The port is controlled by the Aden-based government and lies near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. A closure of the strait would leave Saudi Arabia without an alternative route to the Strait of Hormuz. Pakistan is looking to expand its options for securing fuel supplies amid the current global disruptions. Officials say an arrangement involving 3 Gulf countries could boost storage capacity inside Pakistan itself. Our correspondent has more from Islamabad.
Pakistan is considering a new way to strengthen access to oil supplies during an international crisis. On Sunday, Pakistani officials said a commercial bonded storage scheme was being considered with Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Qatar. Under the proposal, the 3 countries would store crude oil and petroleum products on secure Pakistani territory at their own cost, while also being able to supply international markets from there. Pakistan would not own those stocks, but in event of a conflict, it would have the right to purchase the stored oil and use it for domestic requirements. The proposal has been sent to the Economic Coordination Committee on the directives of Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, with a decision expected next week. Pakistan imports around 90% of its energy requirements. Domestic oil production is about 70,000 barrels a day, compared with the demand of roughly 500,000 barrels. The country also has no strategic petroleum reserves. Officials estimate 1 month of crude reserves would cost around $500 million. An underground storage system could require another $300 to $400 million. The proposal comes as a conflict involving the United States and Iran has disrupted oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz and pushed global petroleum prices higher. For Pakistan, the proposed arrangement could provide access to foreign-held oil during a conflict, as the country remains heavily dependent on imports and faces a higher cost of building strategic reserves of its own. Mariam Shah, A News, Islamabad.
Residents of the Ceuta enclave in North Africa have been demonstrating over Spain and Europe's response to the recent influx of migrants. 4 religious communities joined local authorities and unions in calling for more support.
Hundreds of Ceuta residents took to the streets, demanding action over the migration crisis in the tiny Spanish enclave. They're calling on the Spanish government, European institutions and other public authorities to urgently address the overcrowded situation facing the city. Christians, Muslims, Jews and Hindus joined unions and local authorities at Constitution Square on Sunday.
Ceuta cannot tackle on its own a situation that far exceeds its capabilities and which affects the whole of Spain and Europe. For this reason, through this peaceful civic gathering, we call on the Spanish government, the European institutions and all public authorities to urgently address the reality our city is facing.
The demonstration comes after a major influx from Morocco on the 30th of July. Spanish authorities said as many as 72,000 people crossed into Ceuta after weeks of smaller arrivals. Dozens died in the rush. Most have since returned, but hundreds of unaccompanied minors remain. Spain's government says it expects to transfer some of those minors to the mainland within weeks. Youth Minister Cira Rego said the move would ease pressure on overcrowded reception centres in the enclave.
Meanwhile, Rwanda is again being discussed as a possible transit hub for migrants deported from Europe. Kigali says it's in early talks with several European countries, but no deal has been reached. Michael Beleke reports.
Rwanda is exploring a new role in Europe's migration policy as a possible transit point for deported migrants. The government says it is holding preliminary talks with several European countries. But Kigali is stressing one thing: no agreement has been reached. Officials have not named the countries involved or given details of how such an arrangement would work. The talks come as European governments face pressure to increase deportation of people whose asylum claims have failed. Rwanda has already been involved in similar migration arrangements. It's previously agreed to receive some migrants deported from the United States. For Rwanda, such an arrangement can bring financial benefits. In 2002, Rwanda also agreed a deal with Britain to receive asylum seekers with payments worth millions of dollars going to Kigali. The plan was abandoned before any deportations to Rwanda could begin. But such deals have also drawn criticisms from rights groups over concerns about the protection and legal status of deported migrants. For now, the talks are still at an early stage, with Kigali waiting to see whether they can lead to a formal arrangement. Michael Baleke for A News in Kampala.
Typhoon Dolphin has battered eastern China with torrential rain and powerful winds, raising fears of flooding and landslides. Its effects are also being felt in the Philippines, where a dozen people have been killed and others are missing.
More than 900 trees have broken or uprooted in Yueqing City, with fallen trunks and branches blocking roads in a trail of destruction left by Typhoon Dolphin. Winds reaching up to 50 meters per second kept forestry workers and firefighters clearing debris overnight. They were expected to finish by Monday afternoon. Emergency crews say they've also evacuated residents to safety and removed hazards from high places, responding to more than 200 cases since the typhoon hit Yueqing. Dolphin made landfall near Yuhuan at around 5:30 p.m. on Sunday, before making a second landfall in Yueqing about an hour later. In Zhejiang, industrial cameras captured violent winds and torrential rain at the Huaneng Yuhuan power plant. Despite the conditions, all generating units have remained stable, with operators monitoring them around the clock to maintain safe operations and a stable power supply. China's weather authorities say Dolphin has weakened to a tropical storm, but it continues to bring torrential rain and strong winds to eastern regions. The storm is forecast to move westward before slowing over central and southwestern China and gradually losing strength. Meanwhile, the storm's effects were also being felt in the Philippines. Authorities say at least 12 people have died and 8 remain missing after floods and landslides linked to the southwest monsoon and tropical cyclones Kujira and Dolphin. Nearly more than 500,000 people have been affected across 9 regions and 33 provinces, while more than 32,000 have been displaced and are staying in evacuation centres or with relatives.
Firefighters are continuing to battle wildfires in parts of Spain and France. Meteorologists say the extreme temperatures will persist in much of Western Europe this week.
In eastern Spain, firefighters and members of the military emergency unit battled a wildfire in the Castellón region on Sunday. Around 700 people were evacuated from the town of Cati as a precaution, mainly because of heavy smoke. The fire began on Friday near the town of Tirig and has burned at least 684 hectares within a perimeter of 19 kilometers. No casualties have been reported. Regional authorities in Valencia said they were hopeful that changing weather conditions and higher humidity would help firefighters bring the blaze under control. Crews elsewhere in Spain were also responding to wildfires in the central Segovia mountain range and the southern province of Huelva. Across the border in southwestern France, firefighters quickly contained a smaller wildfire near Saint-Jean-de-Lac. The blaze burned around 3 hectares, but authorities deployed significant resources because of the weather conditions and the risk to nearby homes. The fire comes after a much larger wildfire in France's Gironde department in late July, which scorched 42,000 hectares and forced more than 220,000 people from their homes. Authorities remain on alert as another heat wave is expected this week. Meteo France forecasts temperatures in the mid to high 30s for much of the week, with nearby Bordeaux expected to reach 39 degrees Celsius on Thursday.
Across the Atlantic, a fast-moving wildfire in Western Canada has forced thousands of people from their homes and prompted British Columbia to declare a state of emergency. The Bald Range blaze has nearly doubled in size.
In Western Canada, residents of Peachland and Summerland remained under evacuation orders on Sunday as the Bald Range wildfire burned through nearby hillsides in British Columbia. Officials said it had spread to more than 10,300 hectares by Saturday night. That's 103 squared kilometres. Mayor Patrick Van Minsel said no homes had been lost. However, he urged residents to remain patient because conditions could change quickly.
One of the concerns is when can go back to their home. The good news is that here in Peachland we have no losses of homes, so that's always a good news. They're very patient. They know they have to be patient because it doesn't make any sense to send somebody back not knowing what the situation is going to be a few hours later.
The wildfire nearly doubled in size overnight, prompting British Columbia to declare a state of emergency on Saturday. Officials said it triggered the province's largest evacuation operation of the summer. More than 20,000 people have been forced from their homes so far. The Canadian federal government said on Sunday it would assist British Columbia by providing shelter and accommodation for residents displaced in regions around Summerland and Peachland.
After the break, Kazakhstan seeks new oil export routes through Azerbaijan as pipeline disruptions raise security concerns. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to A News. Frequent disruptions at Russian terminals are accelerating Central Asia's search for more stable export routes. Kazakhstan is now looking to diversify its oil exports, with Azerbaijan and the Middle Corridor emerging as key alternatives to the Caspian Pipeline Consortium.
Kazakhstan is considering the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, the Baku-Supsa route, and Caspian transit through Azerbaijan as additional oil export routes. According to the Ministry of Energy of Kazakhstan, it's paying special attention to the development of the transport corridor passing through Azerbaijan. The push comes amid growing uncertainty surrounding the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, or CPC, which is Kazakhstan's main export route to international markets. This pipeline carries Kazakh oil to the Russian Black Sea port of Novorossiysk. But the war in Ukraine and a series of security incidents in the Black Sea region have raised concerns. Now, analysis shows that Kazakhstan's oil exports dropped.
Oil exports through the Caspian Pipeline Consortium fell more than 20% below their original target in July, according to international analytics firm Kepler. The decline followed a series of drone attacks on tankers near the CPC terminal at Yuzhnaya Azurovka, close to Novorossiysk. The disruptions also affected production, with Kazakhstan cutting its oil output by 14% in July compared with June.
The disruptions are also prompting Kazakh energy companies to look for alternatives. Kazakhstan's national oil and gas company, Kazmunaygas, plans to increase exports through the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, the BTC, by 31% in 2026 compared with 2025, reaching 1.7 million tons. In the first 6 months of this year, 704,000 tons of Kazakh oil were transported through the port of Aktau for onward delivery via the BTC route. This stretches more than 1,700 kilometers across Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey.
Well, joining us now to discuss this is Nobila Nishanbayev from Turan University in Almaty. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. And just to begin with, let's get some context to this. How much are the Ukrainian drone strikes affecting Kazakhstan's ability to export oil through its existing routes?
So, comparing with the previous years, or comparing with decades ago, the effect is huge, because statistically still 80% of Kazakhstan oil will pass by the Caspian Consortium pipeline, CPC, by the territory of Russia. Subsequently, over a couple of years, we have seen the drone attacks stopping the amount of oils. For the long term, it's impacting the financial, economic aspects. So therefore, I think Kazakhstan has already started looking for alternative routes, but most of the roads still will not replace the CPC, because the CPC takes huge amount of proportion of the oil export, 80%, that's too much, directly finding alternative routes. So therefore, Kazakhstan at the same time, I think, is working with the conflict sides and trying to diplomatically negotiate to prevent upcoming any drone attacks. So this is kind of attacking to the third part countries, which is away from the conflicts. So at the same time, to decrease the dependencies on the CPCs, trying to find alternatives. So Baku, Tbilisi, Ceyhan is the one case. The middle corridor is the other case, as well as we want to find alternative routes to the southern part as well as to the eastern part. But this problem is a matter of time, of course. After how long time those conflicts will be resolved and bring long-term stability. But at the same time, it shows how it's dangerous being reliant upon 80% of the trade with the single roads. So therefore, this is a question of the strategic thinking, strategic decision makers for the long term, making a less dependent on single trade routes. In the example of Caspian Sea, you have seen clearly, but economically aspect surely, regardless, we are seeing the urging price for the oil, but we can't export on needed amount because of drone attacks. So therefore, this is how military relations, military process impacts the economy, even the countries who are away from the conflicts.
So that's interesting. Just to go back to something you said there. So do you think Astana is viewing this as a temporary response to the disruption? Can you imagine that Astana will use the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline longer term?
Well, this is very important question. If we have a look happened over the last couple of months on media, so President Tokayev openly criticized in Omsk when he met with President Vladimir Putin. He said, still world, including Kazakhstan, cannot understand what is the reason of the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But at the same time, Kazakhstan is wishing and ready to help to stop the conflict at the diplomatic level, at least to freeze it, because it's not only conflict Ukraine and Russia, but already Kazakhstan is feeling the economic consequences of this conflict. But I would say this is not like short-term ideas, finding alternative roads, sending oil and gas with alternative roads. It will stay because no one gives any guarantees after 5 or 10 years, again, conflict will continue. So therefore, all the alternative projects, including Bahu-Ceyhan Tbilisi and the Middle Corridors and many other projects will stay. I think even they will get extra attention to expand their volumes, annually volumes, and their speed and the competitiveness. But the point is here for not only for Kazakhstan, but for any countries who shares border with the countries, also who shares the borders with landlocked countries like Kazakhstan. It's very important to have diversified trade routes, because at any time when your neighbor got into conflict, you will stuck in the same situation too. So therefore, for Kazakhstan, I think learned enough lessons the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, what not to do and how to see for long term in order to have strategic partners in diversified roles.
So you could imagine that Kazakhstan will accelerate their efforts to diversify away from Russian-controlled energy infrastructure, and talk us through a bit more that relationship between Tokayev and Putin, because it was a very interesting summit in Omsk.
Exactly, an expert who are studying this field, I see there is no any kind of alternative decision rather than expanding, accelerating those alternative divisions. So Kazakhstan, Ukrainian side too, when Ukrainian sides makes a drone attacks on the Kazakhstani, I think one of the intention is to bring Kazakhstan into the conflicts. But by the nature of the foreign force of Kazakhstan, since the beginning of the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, Kazakhstan made it very clear. We support to solve these issues within the agenda of United Nations Charter. The problem should be solved not on the battlefield, but on automatic negotiated tables. But again, this year, reiterated President Tokayev on Omsk. I think this is very strong diplomatic signals from Kazakhstan perspective. Still, it mentioned not only other countries, but Kazakhstan too. Still, we don't understand what is the main reason of the ongoing conflicts. But still, the war is continuing. Also, President supported the Istanbul diplomatic roundtable to bring back, and if the solution is not forcible at the moment, but at least we should to keep it frozen in the examples of other frozen conflicts, because in diplomacy, when the ongoing conflicts frozen, at least it gives a time to think again about the peace and to restore the economic relations and to see from alternative vision countries. So therefore, Kazakhstan vision was very clear and very neutral from my point of view. But over the last 12 months, we have realized that Ukrainian side, they know it very well when they attack drone attacks, in particular the Caspian pipeline consortium. They want to see Kazakhstan reaction, because it also shows they are making drone attack to the Kazakhstani economy, I think, for the long term. So therefore, Kazakhstani's government, from the very beginning of the conflict, they made it very clear to start alternate 2-3 roads. But I think those roads are creating not because of Ukrainian conflict, but because of Kazakhstani long-term management. If the Ukrainian conflict wouldn't happen anyhow, I think Kazakhstan would looking for alternative trade routes, such a kind of, because Kazakhstan exports oil and gas. For us, such a kind of pipelines is critically important. Always having diversified 2-3 pipelines is better than a single pipeline, which is, as always, under threat, like we see in the example of Russian-Ukrainian conflict.
All very interesting. Thank you very much for joining us on the programme this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me.
Uzbekistan has secured a preferential tariff deal for sending fertilizers and petroleum products through Kazakhstan's port of Kryuk towards Georgia. The agreement is expected to make transit along the Trans-Caspian route more attractive for Uzbek exporters and improve access to European markets. Our correspondent Seva Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
Uzbek exporters will now have more favorable conditions for moving fertilizers and petroleum products across the Caspian Sea, as Kazakhstan's port of Kryuk introduces preferential tariffs for these shipments. The agreement was reached by the Railway Administration of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. It comes as the two countries are increasing their use of the Trans-Caspian International Transport Road, which connects Central Asia with the Caucasus, Turkey and Europe. Kryk's location gives it an advantage. The port is among the closest maritime gateways to southern Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. Its capacity has also improved. After dredging works in 2024, the time needed to process a ferry fell from 20 to 12 hours. Ferries can now carry an additional 500 tons of cargo. The growing role of these roads is reflected in the figures. Uzbek cargo handles through the port of Aktau and Kryuk increased by more than 60% in 2025. In the first half of this year, around 50,000 tons of transit cargo from Uzbekistan and more than 1,700 containers passed through Aktau, while container transit along the road through Kazakhstan increased 3.8 times between 2022 and 2025. The new tariff preferences could further strengthen the corridor as Uzbekistan expands alternative routes to international and European markets. Seva Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
That's all we've got time for this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your day. See you soon.